Okay, let's get into this. Try and picture it. You're standing out in the Thar Desert. It's 1998, scorching heat. And the air is just thick with secrecy, this really profound silence over everything. And then, bang, that silence is shattered, but it's not like a sound of fear. It's described more as resolve.
Right. What happened there, May 11th, 1998, that was India's Pokhran-II nuclear tests.
Yeah.
And the source material we're looking at makes it pretty clear it was a moment that really shook the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it fundamentally, redefined India's place on the global stage. The sources, they're quite insistent. This wasn't just some, sudden power grab or ambition out of nowhere.
No, not all.
It came from deep historical roots, strategic necessity. You get the sense history was really listening that day.
It definitely was. So our mission here in this deep dive, and we're sticking only to the material provided, is to really unpack the whole story of Pokhran-II. We need to understand the history behind it, the strategic thinking, the incredible, almost unbelievable execution, and then the legacy, what it meant for India and really for the world.
Right. So diving into these sources then, where do they say the story actually starts? What really set the stage for Pokhran-II?
Well, the sources trace it way back to 1947, actually. India gets independence, sure, but it's born out of that really painful partition. And amidst all that, there's this powerful vision, right, for a strong, united, self-reliant India. And the first prime minister, Nehru, he saw science and technology as absolutely fundamental, not just for defense, but for tackling basic problems, hunger, poverty, you name it.
And that vision, that led to setting up some really key scientific institutions, didn't it? The source calls them the temples of India's scientific spirit, which is quite evocative.
Exactly. Places like the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, the Baba Atomic Research Center that was focused on atomic energy, and DRDO, the Defense Research and Development Organization. These were the bedrock, really, building India's scientific muscle from the ground up.
But while India's building this capacity, focusing at least initially on peaceful uses, the world around it is changing fast. The Cold War is really heating up.
Oh, absolutely. And nuclear weapons, they weren't just military hardware anymore. They'd become, the ultimate symbol, the currency, really, of global power.
Right. And then the source points to a very specific pivotal moment, 1964. What happened then that really shifted things for India?
China. China tested its first nuclear bomb. That was a huge deal. It fundamentally changed the security picture in Asia. Suddenly, there's this major new challenge right on India's doorstep, especially, considering the border conflict just 2 years earlier in '62.
Okay, so a nuclear threat is emerging to the north, but the sources also mention pressure coming from another direction.
They do. To the west, Pakistan was also pushing ahead with its own nuclear program. And the sources suggest this was happening with some, let's say, quiet help from certain global powers. And as things got more tense over Kashmir, you had rising cross-border militancy in the 80s and 90s. Well, that dual threat from potentially two nuclear-armed neighbors, it just became harder and harder for India to ignore without some kind of credible counter.
So India finds itself stuck in this really volatile neighborhood facing multiple nuclear powers or potential ones.
Correct, but for a long time, India held back. Principles, its non-aligned stance. They did conduct that first nuclear test back in 1974, codenamed Smiling Buddha.
Right, the peaceful nuclear explosion.
Officially, yes, a
Yeah.
peony. But internationally, it sent a clear signal. India had the know-how.
And that's when the international pressure really ramps up, isn't it?
Precisely. That '74 test, it led to major backlash,
Yeah.
sanctions, tech restrictions, and this big global push around the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT.
And the source details India's really firm refusal to sign the NPT. What were the main reasons given in the material?
The sources are pretty explicit on this. India saw the NPT as, fundamentally discriminatory, unjust even.
How so?
It basically created two classes of nations, the nuclear haves and the have-nots. It locked in the arsenals of the existing nuclear powers while telling everyone else, including India, sorry, you can never develop these weapons, even if you felt you needed them for self-defense against those very powers.
So India's argument, as described, was basically disarmament has to be for everyone universally, not a system that protects the existing nuclear club.
Yes, that was the core of it. So they chose what was definitely the harder road. Stay outside the treaty, keep quiet, and build up their own capabilities indigenously over decades.
Okay, so fast forward to the 1990s. The Cold War might be over globally, but for India, those regional threats, they hadn't gone away.
Not at all. If anything, nuclear-armed neighbors were becoming more assertive. The sources suggest India started feeling that its long-held position, silence, strategic ambiguity,
Yeah.
it just wasn't cutting it anymore for security. The time was maybe coming to make its capability crystal clear.
So the picture was two nuclear states on its borders, both with their own agendas. And non-alignment couldn't mean being unprepared.
Which then leads to the massive question the sources really dig into.
Yeah.
How on earth do you pull off something as huge and sensitive as a nuclear test series when the world's biggest powers, especially the U.S., are watching your every move?
Yeah.
Literally, with satellites overhead.
Yeah, the planning and execution of Pokhran-II, the sources make it sound like something out of a spy thriller. An absolute masterclass in secrecy. The stakes were just incredibly high because they knew they were being watched.
And leading this whole thing, you had these brilliant minds, people like Dr. A.P.J. Abdul Kalam, the missile man, and Dr. Archie Dambaram, who is heading the Atomic Energy Commission. Their technical vision, their meticulous planning, that was the foundation.
And back in Delhi, it was Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee who gave the final green light, understanding the huge implications, for national sovereignty.
But it wasn't just them. It was this massive, coordinated effort across different agencies. The Indian Armed Forces, they provided absolutely crucial logistics. And the intelligence agencies, especially RAW, India's external intelligence, and the military engineering services, they were key in just keeping everything completely secret, completely invisible.
The source material mentions some incredible tactics they used for the secrecy, like engineers and scientists showing up at the test site using fake names.
Oh, yeah.
Equipment moved only under the cover of darkness with false shipping manifests.
Yes, and dodging the satellites, that was maybe the most critical part. They knew the CIA had constant eyes in the sky. So any activity on the surface at the test site, it would just stop dead whenever they expected a satellite to pass over. Test shafts were camouflaged like you wouldn't believe. Timelines were kept flexible, adjusted based on those surveillance windows, and communication. Strictly need to know. Code names, burning documents, never using the same secure line twice. Silence wasn't just golden, it was survival.
It just paints this picture of building something absolutely historic, piece by painstaking piece, totally in secret, out in the middle of the desert, while potentially being watched constantly. They must have felt the weight of enormous expectations.
Which brings us right to that moment. May 11th, 1998, about 3:45 p.m. local time, the desert was ready, the countdown hit 0.
And the world had absolutely no clue.
Until that deep rumble, a sort of concussive wave through the earth. India had done it. 5 underground nuclear tests conducted successfully. But the sources really emphasized the precision involved. It was surgical.
And the sources break down what they actually tested that first day, May 11th. There was a thermonuclear device, a hydrogen bomb, essentially.
Right.
A standard fission bomb, which kind of validated their basic proven design. And a sub-kiloton device, smaller yield, important for tactical uses and getting simulation data.
Each one had a specific job, technically and strategically. Confirming the science, showing they could scale the yield up or down, and proving they could do it all themselves, different types of bombs. Then, 2 days later, May 13th, 2 more tests. Both sub-kiloton, again smaller, tactical, but strategically vital for shaping their future doctrine.
And the success wasn't just that they went boom, but the sources stressed the technical details. Everything was perfectly contained underground. Minimal environmental disturbance, 0 radiation leakage detected off-site. India showed it hadn't just mastered the physics, but the really complex engineering and control needed too.
Right. Back in Delhi, Prime Minister Vajpayee steps up and makes the historic announcement. India is now officially a nuclear weapons state. But, and this is crucial, he immediately followed it up with a major pledge, a commitment to a no first-use policy. India wouldn't be the one to start a nuclear conflict.
And the reaction inside India, how did that play out?
According to the sources, it was just this huge wave of national pride, celebration. From schools to army barracks, there was this profound feeling that India had finally stood up, asserted its sovereignty, its capability. It felt like more than just technology. It was about believing that a free India could stand on its own 2 feet and protect itself in a pretty tough world.
But globally, well, that was a very different story, wasn't it? Immediate and mostly negative reactions, shockwaves and headlines around the world.
Oh, absolutely, especially from Washington. President Clinton came out strongly, condemned the tests. Sanctions were slapped on pretty quickly under something called the Glenn Amendment, freezing certain aid, financial support. The message was loud and clear. India had just thrown a major wrench into the existing global nuclear order.
And Pakistan, how did they respond?
Predictably, tensions shot right up across the border. Just a couple of weeks later, May 28, 1998, Pakistan conducts its own series of nuclear tests up in the Chagai Hills. That moment really marked the overt, undeniable nuclearization of South Asia. Two declared nuclear powers, side by side.
But India didn't seem to just, retreat under all this international pressure. The sources suggest they actually stepped forward right into the diplomatic storm.
They really did. Indian diplomats launched this massive global outreach effort, explaining the why behind the tests, clarifying their intentions were purely defensive, and hammering home that commitment to non-proliferation principles like no first use. The sources point out the world might have expected India to apologize or back down somehow.
Right.
But instead, India engaged, explained its actions with, reason, resolve, and a sense of dignity.
And over time, did those perceptions start to change? Did the world start to see it differently?
Gradually, yes. It took time. But nations began to see India's move less as reckless aggression and more as maybe a strategic assertion of its autonomy, its security needs in a difficult region. The sanctions were tough, economically challenging, no doubt. But India weathered the storm. And slowly, relationships started to mend. Not based on India giving in, but on a kind of mutual respect for its demonstrated capability and its stated restrained intentions. The sources describe India entering the nuclear club, yeah, but doing it with a clear purpose. Protect its place, make sure it gets heard.
And amidst all that global debate and pressure back home, India continued to celebrate the achievement itself, the technical side, and what it represented domestically.
Absolutely. And the framing wasn't about celebrating destructive power. It was about celebrating indigenous capability, national discipline, scientific vision. The media coverage, as described, wasn't just about defiance. It was about India fulfilling its destiny, standing strong, self-reliant. It really was a moment of profound national unity, it seems.
And that strength, as you mentioned earlier, came with that declared restraint. India didn't start posturing aggressively afterward.
Exactly. They clarified their position, locked down their commitments. And this eventually led to the formal release of India's official nuclear doctrine in 2003.
Okay, what were the key pillars of that doctrine? What did it lay out?
Its core philosophy, according to the sources, is basically peace through strength. The main principles were, first, use that solid commitment never to start a nuclear war. Second, credible minimum deterrence.
Meaning
maintaining just enough nuclear capability to deter anyone thinking of attacking India with nuclear weapons, but not getting into some kind of crazy, open-ended arms race. Just enough to make an adversary think twice. Or maybe 3 times.
And crucially, the doctrine cemented clear civilian control over the arsenal, right? The final say rested with the elected political leadership, not the military.
Yes, absolutely vital. This whole doctrine positioned India's nuclear program very clearly. It's for defense, for dissuasion. It's meant to prevent war, not fight one. The message to the world was, these weapons are here to guarantee our security and stop aggression, not for conquest or bullying.
So looking back, Pokhran-II was way more than just a set of tests. The sources frame it as this profound geopolitical moment, almost an awakening for India.
Definitely. It really marked the start of India becoming much more assertive on the world stage. You see it in places like the UN, forums like BRICS, practicing what people now call strategic autonomy, basically making decisions based on India's own national interests, not just rigidly aligning with one power bloc or another.
And that shift, that new standing, led to some pretty concrete diplomatic wins down the line, like that landmark India-U.S. civil nuclear agreement in 2008.
That was huge, a massive turning point. It was basically the world, led by the U.S. in this case, acknowledging that even though India wasn't in the NPT, it was behaving like a responsible nuclear state. It had a clean record on not spreading nuclear materials or technology.
And that agreement really opened doors, didn't it? India started getting into major global export control groups.
It did. Memberships in really crucial regimes like the Missile Technology Control Regime, MTCR, the Wassenaar Arrangement that deals with conventional arms and dual-use tech, and the Australia Group, which focuses on chemical and biological weapons stuff. Getting into each of these was like another step towards integrating into the global non-proliferation system, and a nod, really a sign of respect for India's practices.
The sources also make a point, a really important one, about highlighting the people involved, especially the ones who weren't in the limelight. The often unseen heroes of Pokhran. It wasn't just about the science, but the immense human effort, the sacrifice.
Yeah, one source calls it a test of spirit, silence, and sacrifice. And you think about it, the scientists who literally lived underground in bunkers for days, totally isolated to keep the secret. The engineers working practically in the dark, by moonlight sometimes, or minimal light, digging shafts, putting up camouflage, handling fake paperwork day in, day out, all to dodge those satellite passes.
And the intelligence guys, the military engineers, constantly tracking satellite orbits, timing every single move on the ground down to the second. These weren't famous faces, you know? No parades for them, just the silence and the knowledge of what they were part of.
Their motivation, the sources suggest, was pure service to the nation. The actual explosions lasted seconds, right? But they were the result of years of incredible courage, discipline, ingenuity, often carried out completely in the shadows. India owes a massive debt to those individuals.
So, wrapping this up, looking at the whole story presented in these sources, what does this history really mean for India today? What's the lasting impact?
Well, the argument in the sources is that Pokhran wasn't just about getting nuclear weapons. It was like an ignition point. It sparked this much broader push towards technological self-reliance that you see across so many different fields in India now. You see the ripples in India's space program, ISRO, right? Launching incredibly complex missions like Mangalian to Mars. You see it in advanced defense systems from DRDO, the Agni missiles, the Ariane nuclear submarines, even in ballistic missile defense capabilities.
That whole idea of Aatmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India, it really seems to have deep roots tracing back to those secret efforts out in the desert.
Absolutely. From reaching other planets to building cyber defenses to developing really sophisticated nuclear tech and then talking about it responsibly on the world stage, the legacy isn't just the mushroom cloud, metaphorical or otherwise. It's the belief it seems to have instilled across the country. India doesn't just have to follow others. It has the brains, the capability, and the sheer determination to forge its own path and innovate on its own terms.
The sources seem to land on this idea that really at its heart, Pokhran wasn't about aggression. It wasn't about starting wars. It was about dignity. It was India signaling very clearly to the rest of the world, we demand to be heard, we demand respect, and we will guarantee our own security.
Yeah, it was a message kind of etched into history, showing that strength and peace, they can coexist. And that sometimes silence, combined with quiet, focused determination, can be way more powerful than shouting. The path to a self-reliant India, the sources seem to say, feels like destiny, but a destiny fulfilled through sheer hard work and unwavering resolve.
So reflecting on this whole deep dive and sticking just to the source material we've covered, maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. What does it really mean for any nation today to try and balance that fundamental need for security, for sovereignty, with the global pressure for non-proliferation? Especially when that nation feels the existing international rules, like the NPT back then, are fundamentally unequal or discriminatory. This story definitely suggests that making those incredibly tough choices has really long-lasting consequences. And pulling it off requires not just amazing technical skill, but also that quiet, steely resolve from a whole lot of people, the ones you see, and maybe even more importantly, the ones you don't.